You know what nobody tells you about prenups? They're supposed to protect both people. But sometimes one person gets way smarter than you expected. I'm Sabrina. I'm 29. And I just learned the hard way that my husband Daniel played a game I didn't even know we were playing. 10 years. 10 underscore underscore years. I thought I had everything figured out. Marriage to a decent guy who supported my career. Parents who finally approved of my choices. And Roman still in my life exactly how I wanted him. I had my cake and I was eating it too. And honestly, I thought I deserved both. See, what happened was my parents basically forced my hand back in college. I'd been with Roman since high school and we were perfect together. We understood each other on this level that Daniel and I never reached. But my parents hated him, said he was going nowhere, that I was wasting my potential, that they'd cut me off financially if I didn't end things. They had this whole trust fund situation tied up and I wasn't about to lose everything for some guy, even if that guy was the love of my life. So I did what I had to do. I met Daniel through mutual friends about 3 months after my parents gave me their ultimatum. He was studying finance, came from a good family, and most importantly, my parents loved him immediately. The thing is, Roman and I never actually broke up. We just went underground. My parents thought I'd moved on. Daniel thought he was getting this amazing girl who chose him. And I thought I was being smart by keeping the best of both worlds. Daniel proposed after we'd been together for 2 years. And honestly, it felt like the natural next step. My parents were thrilled. His parents were thrilled. And Roman understood that this was just something I had to do for my future. The prenup was my parents' idea, not mine. The terms seemed straightforward. If we divorced before 10 years, I kept my family money and assets. He got basically nothing. After 10 years, everything would be split 50/50. As long as the divorce wasn't his fault. My parents figured 10 years was long enough to prove the marriage was real. Daniel was so supportive during those early years. He encouraged me to take the consulting job that required travel. He never complained when I had to work late or go out of town for business trips. What I realize now is that he was giving me all the rope I needed to hang myself. Every business trip was an opportunity to see Roman. Every late night at the office was a chance to text him without Daniel looking over my shoulder. Every weekend conference was actually a weekend getaway with the person I really wanted to be with. Roman had moved about 2 hours away for work, so it wasn't like we could see each other constantly, but we made it work. Hotel rooms during my business trips, quick lunch dates when I claimed to be in client meetings, weekend girls trips that were actually romantic getaways. I got really good at managing both relationships, and honestly, I felt like I was handling everything perfectly. The crazy part is that I never felt guilty about it. Maybe that makes me a terrible person, but I genuinely felt like I'd been forced into an impossible situation by my parents. And this was the only way to make everyone happy while still being true to my feelings. Daniel was getting a good deal. I kept house. I was a good companion. I supported his goals. And I never caused drama. What he didn't know wouldn't hurt him. For 8 years, this system worked perfectly. Daniel got promoted twice and started making really good money. I built my own client base and started bringing in serious income from my consulting work. Roman's career took off too, and he bought this amazing house where we could spend weekends together. When I told Daniel I was visiting my college roommate or attending professional development seminars, by year 8, I had turned deception into an art form. And honestly, I was pretty proud of my skills. I could plan romantic getaways with Roman while sitting right next to Daniel on the couch, texting under the guise of responding to work emails. I had learned to compartmentalize so completely that I could be fully present with each of them without feeling conflicted. The logistics had become second nature. I had a separate credit card that I used for expenses related to seeing Roman: hotels, gas, dinners, gifts. I told Daniel it was my business expenses card for client entertainment that I'd reconcile with my company later. I had a fake email account that I used only for communicating with Roman, and I'd set up notifications so I'd know immediately when he messaged me, even if I was sitting in a meeting or having dinner with Daniel. Daniel had started working longer hours around this time, which made everything easier. His financial firm was expanding and he was taking on bigger clients. Some weeks he'd work until 8 or 9 every night, and weekends he'd often have calls with international clients. I told myself this was perfect. He was focused on building his career, I was focused on building mine, and we were both mature enough to give each other the space we needed. Roman and I had settled into this rhythm where we'd see each other every couple of weeks, um, either during my business trips or when I could arrange to meet him somewhere for a weekend. We'd started talking about more serious things, what we really wanted out of life, whether we were happy with how things were going. He'd hint sometimes that he was getting tired of the secrecy, that he wanted to be able to introduce me to his friends as his actual girlfriend instead of his friend from college. But he also understood my situation. I had convinced myself that I was protecting everyone by maintaining this setup. Daniel got the stability and partnership he wanted without the drama of knowing about Roman. Roman got the relationship and intimacy he wanted without the pressure of dealing with my family or social obligations. My parents got the son-in-law they approved of. And I got to honor my feelings for Roman while also securing my future and keeping everyone happy. The weird part is that I started to feel like the arrangement was making me a better wife in some ways because I was getting my emotional and physical needs met with Roman. I could be more patient and understanding with Daniel. I wasn't resentful that he worked long hours or wasn't naturally romantic because I wasn't depending on him for those things. I could appreciate his good qualities, his reliability, his intelligence, his ambition without feeling frustrated by the qualities he lacked. Daniel seemed happy too, or at least content. He never complained about our relationship or suggested that anything was missing. He seemed proud of my career success and supportive of my travel schedule. He bragged about me to his friends and colleagues, talking about how independent and accomplished I was. When we did spend time together, we got along well. I thought we'd achieved the kind of mature, balanced partnership that a lot of couples struggle to find. Looking back, I think I got overconfident. After 8 years of managing both relationships successfully, I stopped being as careful about covering my tracks. I'd gotten so good at the double life that it felt effortless. And when something feels effortless, you start to get sloppy. I'd leave my phone face up on the counter when Roman texted. I'd use the same excuses multiple times without keeping track. I'd come home from weekends with Roman in such a good mood that I probably seemed like a different person. But Daniel never called me out on any inconsistencies or asked uncomfortable questions. He just continued being supportive and understanding, which reinforced my belief that I was handling everything perfectly and that he suspected nothing. What I know now is that he was building a case, documenting everything, and waiting for the perfect moment to make his move. Our 10th wedding anniversary fell on a Tuesday, which felt anticlimactic for such a milestone. Daniel suggested we celebrate that weekend instead. Maybe take a trip somewhere nice. We ended up going to this resort about 3 hours away, the kind of place with a spa and fancy restaurants. Daniel seemed relaxed and happy the whole weekend, more attentive than he'd been in months. We did the wine tasting, got couples massages, had long dinners where we talked about our early relationship. He even brought up the idea of finally starting a family, saying that now that we were both established in our careers, maybe it was time to think about kids. Tuesday morning, Daniel left for work at his usual time. I had a client call scheduled for 9, so I was working from home that day. Around 10:30, my doorbell rang. I figured it was a delivery and almost didn't answer because I was in the middle of reviewing a proposal. But the bell kept ringing, so finally I went to see who it was. A man in a suit was standing on my porch with an envelope in his hand. He asked if I was Sabrina Morrison. And when I said yes, he handed me the envelope and said I was being served with divorce papers. I literally laughed because I thought it was some kind of mistake or prank. I told him he had the wrong house, that my husband and I had just celebrated our anniversary and everything was fine. I closed the door and stood there holding this envelope, still convinced it was some administrative error. But when I opened it and started reading, I saw Daniel's name as the petitioner and mine as the respondent. The filing date was that morning, exactly 10 years and 1 day after our wedding. There was a whole section about irreconcilable differences and another section about asset division that mentioned the prenup terms. At the bottom was a list of evidence being submitted, including photographs, phone records, hotel receipts, and witness statements related to extramarital affair ongoing throughout the duration of the marriage. My first reaction wasn't panic or fear. It was complete confusion. How could Daniel have evidence of anything when I'd been so careful? How could he have been planning this when he'd seemed completely normal throughout our anniversary weekend? I called his office and his assistant said he was in meetings all day and couldn't be reached. I called his cell phone and it went straight to voicemail. That evening, Daniel came home at his normal time and acted like nothing had happened. He asked about my day, mentioned that he'd stopped at the grocery store to pick up stuff for dinner. I was sitting at the kitchen table with the divorce papers spread out in front of me, and he glanced at them like they were work documents. That didn't concern him. Finally, I asked him what the hell was going on, and he said calmly that he thought it was time for us to end our marriage. I demanded to know how long he'd known about Roman, expecting him to say he'd recently discovered something or hired a private investigator in the past few months. He said he'd known since about 6 months after Roman and I reconnected, which meant he'd known for over 8 years. 8 years of supporting my career, encouraging my travel, being understanding about my schedule, celebrating anniversaries and holidays, all while knowing that I was having an affair. When I asked why he'd waited so long to do anything about it, he explained about the prenup terms and how the asset division changed after 10 years. Before our 10th anniversary, if we divorced, I would have kept my family money and most of our shared assets because of how the prenup was structured. After 10 years, everything would be split 50/50. And because I'd violated the fidelity clause, he'd actually be entitled to more than half of everything we'd built together. The most humiliating part was realizing how stupid I'd been. All those times I thought I was being clever and careful, he'd been documenting everything. All those business trips where I thought I was successfully managing my double life, he'd been collecting evidence. I'd been playing checkers while he was playing chess, and I'd lost a game I didn't even know we were playing. The next few days were a blur of phone calls with lawyers trying to understand exactly how screwed I was and whether there was any way to challenge the divorce terms. My attorney was honest with me in a way I wasn't prepared for. The evidence Daniel had collected was comprehensive and damning, and the prenup I'd signed was ironclad. Because the affair had been ongoing throughout our marriage, I'd violated the fidelity clause, which meant I was essentially forfeiting my right to the protective terms my parents had negotiated. What made it worse was discovering the extent of Daniel's documentation. He had photos of Roman and me together at restaurants and hotels. He had copies of credit card statements showing charges that didn't match up with my claimed business expenses. He had phone records showing calls and texts to numbers that weren't associated with any of my legitimate business contacts. He had testimony from a private investigator who'd been following me on and off for months. My parents' reaction was somehow worse than the legal situation. When I called to tell them about the divorce and explain what was happening, my mother's first response was to ask if the allegations were true. When I admitted that, yes, I'd been seeing Roman throughout my marriage, there was this long silence before my father said they were deeply disappointed in my choices and would need time to process everything. Roman's reaction was almost as complicated. When I told him about the divorce and explained that Daniel had known about us all along, he was quiet for a long time before asking why I hadn't told him that our relationship was being documented and investigated. I said I hadn't known, but he pointed out that this put him in a really awkward position professionally and socially. He also asked questions I wasn't prepared to answer, like whether I'd ever actually intended to leave Daniel for him, or if I'd just been using our relationship to make my marriage more tolerable. When I couldn't give him a clear answer, he said he needed some space to figure out how he felt about everything. The practical implications started hitting me within weeks. Daniel had moved out into a furnished apartment, leaving me alone in the house that we bought together, but that I now couldn't afford to maintain on my own. My business was suffering because I was distracted and emotional. And several clients had started asking questions about my personal situation after word began spreading through our professional network. What really got to me was how calculated Daniel's approach had been. He'd spent years positioning himself as the perfect husband while collecting evidence that would destroy me. He'd encouraged my independence and my travel because it gave me more opportunities to incriminate myself. He'd been patient and supportive because he knew that eventually he'd be able to use my own behavior against me in a way that would give him everything he wanted. My lawyer explained that fighting the divorce would be expensive and ultimately pointless since the evidence against me was overwhelming and the prenup terms were clear. The best I could hope for was to negotiate some minor adjustments to the timeline for asset division, but even that would require me to admit fault and accept responsibility for ending the marriage through my infidelity. 18 months later, I'm living in a one-bedroom apartment across town, working freelance because my consulting business fell apart when clients started questioning my judgment and reliability. The divorce was finalized 8 months ago, and Daniel walked away with the house, most of our shared assets, and a settlement that basically reset my financial situation to where I was when I was 25. Daniel moved on faster than I expected. He's dating someone he met through work. And from what I hear through mutual friends, she's everything I never was. Completely focused on him, honest about her feelings, genuinely interested in building a life together without keeping one foot out the door. They've been together for about 6 months, and people keep mentioning how happy he seems, how relaxed and confident he is in ways he never was with me. Roman and I tried to make things work for a few months after the divorce was filed, but the foundation of our relationship had been the excitement and secrecy of the affair. Without that dynamic, we were just two people who built a connection on deception and convenience rather than genuine compatibility. Eventually, he started seeing someone else, and honestly, I couldn't even be mad about it because our entire relationship had been based on both of us being with other people. My parents and I are slowly rebuilding our relationship, but it's different now. They help me financially when I really need it, but there's this underlying disappointment that colors every interaction. They trusted me to make mature decisions, and I proved that I was still the same impulsive person who'd chosen immediate gratification over long-term thinking. Um, the hardest part is accepting that Daniel was smarter than me in every way that mattered. While I was congratulating myself on managing two relationships, he was thinking 10 steps ahead and positioning himself to come out on top regardless of what I chose to do. While I was focused on immediate pleasure and convenience, he was building a case that would give him justice and freedom. I keep trying to find ways to blame him for how things turned out. But the truth is that every choice I made was my own. I chose to marry him while still being in love with someone else. I chose to continue seeing Roman instead of working on my marriage or ending it. Honestly, I chose convenience and security over making hard decisions about what I really wanted. Daniel didn't force me into any of those choices. He just made sure that when the consequences came, they'd be real and meaningful. What bothers me most is that he got everything he wanted in the end. He got 10 years of support while he built his career and established himself. Financially, he got to look like the wronged party when our marriage ended, which made it easier for him to move on socially and professionally. He got a financial settlement that set him up for whatever comes next. And he got rid of a wife who was never really invested in their marriage without having to be the bad guy. The other thing that gets to me is how everyone acts like he's some kind of hero for being so patient and strategic about the whole thing. People talk about how smart he was to wait until the prenup terms changed, how admirable it was that he didn't act impulsively or emotionally. But from my perspective, he was lying to me just as much as I was lying to him. He was pretending to be a loving husband while secretly planning my destruction. I know that sounds hypocritical coming from someone who was having an affair for 8 years. But there's something about the cold calculation of his approach that feels worse than my emotional messiness. I was lying because I was trying to avoid hurting people and because I genuinely didn't know how to choose between two different lives I wanted. He was lying because he was setting a trap that would give him maximum leverage when he decided to spring it. But ultimately, none of that changes the reality of where I am now. I'm 31 years old, starting over financially and socially, trying to rebuild my career and my relationships from scratch. Daniel is moving forward with someone who actually wants to be with him, building the kind of honest partnership that I was never able to give him. Roman, nah, is with someone who didn't spend 10 years proving that she'd choose security over love when forced to pick. The worst part is that I still don't know if I'd make different choices if I could go back and do it again. The situation with my parents and Roman was genuinely impossible. And marrying Daniel did give me the stability and support I needed to build my career. Maybe I should have been honest with Daniel from the beginning about my feelings for Roman, but that would have meant losing him. And I wasn't ready to give up the life we were building together. I know I'm supposed to say I've learned my lesson and grown as a person, but honestly, I think I just learned that I'm not as smart as I thought I was, and that other people can be more calculating than I ever imagined. The idea that love and honesty always win in the end feels naive when I look at how this all played out. Daniel won because he was smarter and more ruthless. It's not because he was more honest or loving. Maybe that makes me um, the villain in this story, but I'm tired of pretending that everyone else's motives were pure while mine were selfish. We all made choices based on what we wanted and what we thought we could get away with. The difference is that Daniel's choices worked out and mine didn't. That doesn't make him a better person than me. It just makes him a smarter player in a game where the stakes were higher than I realized.